Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss No Time to Die, starring Daniel Craig, Remy Malek, Leah Seydoux, Anna De Armas, Lashana Lynch, Ben Winshaw, Naomi Harris, Jeffrey Wright, Christoph Waltz, and Ray Fiennes, directed by Kari Joji Fukunaga. Forgive me if I said that wrong. Now, before I get into this movie, I've seen it twice. The first time I saw it was in a theater, like, say the screen's right here and then there's stuff going on the side during the action scenes called Screen X. And the second time I saw it in a 3D show. Now, is it as good as Casino Royale or any of the other ones? Let's see. Let's get into it. We open with a little girl that happens to be Madeline Swan in a house in the middle of the snow, which we heard at last time in Spectre, Madeline telling the story of how a bad man broke into her house with her mother as the bad man was looking for Mr. White, who shot himself last time but wasn't home, so instead shoots Madeline's mother as she hides upstairs, while the bad man behind the mask, named Lucifer Safin, I'm going to call him Safin, played by Oscar winner from Bohemian Rhapsody, Remy Malek. As Madeline shoots at Safin and is not dead, go figure, but Madeline picks him up and awakens as Madeline runs to the ice where she falls in the cold water, and Safin shoots at her and realizes she's just a kid and gets her out of the ice as Safin's family was killed by Mr. White, so he wants revenge against him by shooting his wife and his daughter, which is now explained much better here than in Spectre. And now I get the full story. We move on to Madeline as an adult, returned by Leah Seydoux, on vacation with James Bond, returned by Daniel Craig, as they go to a town called Matera, Italy, which is a beautiful location where Vesper from Casino Royale was buried, and James can't let her go until the next day when he wishes her to forgive him while he goes to the cemetery where she was buried, and I'm so glad they brought her briefly back in a much better way than in Quantum of Solace and Spectre, which are both bad films, as I pointed out before. And I like James and Madeline as a couple, as I was hoping they would end up together until we get the ending, which I'll get to later. But James delivers his wish to Vesper's grave, and it blows up, not killing James, as he was followed by Spectre Agent Primo, aka Cyclops, as he looked rather creepy as they attack him by Blofeld and tells him Madeline is the daughter of Spectre. And I love the images being shown in this movie as it was shot very well. While on the run, James and Madeline drive around to not get killed by Spectre, while Blofeld calls them and says her sacrifice would be glory, and her father would be so proud of her. And they stop for a second as the classic car from Skyfall is bulletproof, and Cyclops tries to break his way in, and James unleashes the machine guns, and the circles, which was a badass move in the trailer and in this movie. They get out of being trapped from Spectre and drive to the train station, and he says goodbye to Madeline and tells her she'll never see him again. And we move on to the song by Billie Eilish called No Time to Die, and it was a good song, but honestly, I wouldn't put it on my iPhone, but otherwise, I do like the song, as the opening credits with the song came up 25 minutes into the movie, and it was better done than in, say, Spectre, for example, as the opening action sequence kept me engaged with the movie. We move on to 5 years later, where Spectre agents led by Safin break into a laboratory where they attack and get a scientist named Valdo Albuchev. I don't know if I'm saying the name right, please forgive me. Working for them as they steal a second scientist and kill the others and take a virus to destroy the world and kill the second scientist and bring Valdo with them as he works for Safin. And Spectre, which is a cool robbery scene, but not quite as good as The Dark Knight, in my opinion. Moneypenny, returned by Naomi Harris, tells M, returned by Ray Fiennes, about Spectre agents taking something that could destroy the world, as James now lives in Jamaica, which I've been to, by the way, where he's retired, and is encountered by Felix Leiter, returned by Jeffrey Wright. And his other guy, Logan Ash, where they talk quietly at a bar when James gets another drink for them and bumps into Nomi, played by Lashana Lynch from Captain Marvel. Remember her? And James denies Felix at first, as he wants James to do something in Cuba, and as he leaves and his car gets destroyed and hitched by a ride by Nomi, and takes him to his house, and Nomi tells James she's not just a double O, but she's 007. And Nomi did bug the crap out of me this entire movie, as believe it or not. So does Logan, but I like the scene in Jamaica. MQ returned by Ben Whishaw, and Tanner returned by Rory Kinnear, check on Blofeld returned by Christoph Waltz as he's acting crazy, which is kind of funny, as James calls him, and after that phone call, the next day he calls Felix and tells him he's in, as he goes to Cuba and sees Nomi and goes to Paloma, played by Ana de Armas, who previously worked with Daniel Craig in Knives Out, which was a terrific murder mystery. I can't wait to get to that series too, when that second one comes out on Netflix. And she had 3 weeks training, which was kind of funny. James and Paloma go to a party where Valdo is at, and so is Cyclops, as James and Paloma enter the party full of Spectre agents, as it's Blofeld's birthday, as he kills his Spectre agents, but doesn't kill James, Paloma, Cyclops, and Valdo, as James gets Valdo, and Nomi takes him away, while James goes after him, and Paloma kicks the asses of some Spectre agents, and James continues to go after Valdo, while Paloma grabs a car and catches Valdo and borrows Nomi's plane as she blows up a cord, and gets away with James. And James says goodbye to Paloma and takes Valdo to a ship led by Felix. And I like the scenes, as this is the only time we'll see Ana de Armas in this whole entire movie, as I really like her in this movie, and Cuba looks absolutely gorgeous. But I wish she was more in this movie than what she was in. I was a little disappointed in that. James gets to the boat with Valdo and sees Felix and Logan, as they made James walk right into a trap, and interrogates Valdo and tells them Logan works for Spectre, as James and Felix get trapped in the boat while Felix is bleeding, and they blow the boat up. And good thing Logan works for Spectre, because that guy really got on my nerves. The boat is sinking, and Felix tells James to leave him and gives him a weapon and tells him to make it worth it to kill Logan. And as James leaves Felix, and I can't believe Felix is dead at this point, as James gets a lifeboat and gets rescued by a ship, and what did make me sad is Felix's death. James gets a card and goes to MI6 to visit M, as James tells him Felix is dead, and he did the wrong thing, as he almost got James killed, as he can identify, and wants to trade with Blofeld, and asks M why he didn't shut down Hercules, as he doesn't tell M the identification of the killer, that James won't get into seeing Blofeld. And the acting in this scene was pretty good. Moneypenny asks James what he's doing for dinner, as she brings him to Q's place to check the files in Hercules. And there's hidden files, as they see thousands of Spectre agents, as James comes to Belmarsh and finds out Madeline is a doctor. And at Belmarsh, as she gets a visit from Safine, and Remy Malek pulls off the bad guy role very nicely, like he pulled off Freddie Mercury very well in Bohemian Rhapsody, as he's not comfortable talking about himself, as she gets a box from the mask that he wore in the beginning of the movie when he saved Madeline when she was a little girl, as his performance was very engaging as a Bond villain. James goes outside to London to meet with M to tell him what Spectre wants with Blofeld, and Tanner comes by to get him, as James has been reimbursed as a 00, and Nomi isn't too thrilled about it, while he finds out Q and Moneypenny kept James under Q's roof, and gets James to go to Blofeld, as he goes to Belmarsh and comes in with Madeline, as she's just as shocked as he was when he found out she was a psychiatrist at Belmarsh. While Tanner and Nomi watch them interrogate, and as soon as Blofeld comes in, Madeline shakes because she's nervous and she runs out while James talks with Blofeld. And Madeline tells James she's going home, and after the intense interrogation with Blofeld, James grabs Blofeld, but a Spectre agent somewhere kills Blofeld off screen. At the moment did confuse me, meaning did a Spectre agent kill him or did James kill him? It totally lost me. James hears Madeline's name being brought by Blofeld as he goes to the house she lived at as a little girl, and he tells her Blofeld is dead and how much he loves and cares for her, as he regretted putting her on that train in the beginning of the movie, which was beautifully written and acted by both Daniel Craig and Lea Seydoux. And as they kiss, her kid named, let me see if I'm saying this right, Mathilde comes in. And from the minute I first saw her and her blue eyes, I'm not only thinking, is it Madeline's kid, but it's also James's kid. As she tells him it's not his kid. And I'm calling bullcrap at this point because she got his eyes. She's got his eyes. Madeline shows James a room and she tells him about Safine, and James wants to kill him. And which makes perfect sense as he's terrorizing Madeline. The next morning, James makes breakfast for Mathilde and gets a call from MI6 and locates Logan's location as he's coming for Madeline and their child, as they chase them down and go in the forest to hide Madeline and Mathilde, while James shoots down the bad guys, including Logan, as his car flips over and James lets the car kill Logan, which by smashing his head, because it's a PG-13 rated movie, as they show it off screen, so it makes sense. And Madeline grows on me as a badass because last time she said she hated guns and now she's using them, which is an interesting growth on the character. Safine does capture both of them, and James tries to catch up with them until he's too late, as they get on a helicopter and walk a very long way and hitches a ride and with Nomi, and gets James and Nomi on a plane to get to Safine's private island. And they board the plane and tells M to give James back the 007 position, as she says it's just a number, and Nomi is kind of growing on me. Safine takes Madeline and Mathilde to her secret lair, as it's his father's garden, and takes Mathilde to the garden and shows him his favorite plant, but she doesn't like the garden because it's ran by Safine, and his men separate Mathilde and Madeline to different places. And I like the acting in these scenes, as it's well acted by these actors, and the little girl works for bait reasons, I'll say. James and Nomi get to the island and sneak around to the factory of the whole island and plants, while M, Moneypenny, and Tanner watch with Q, instructing them to go from place to place, and they invade the factory as Nomi knocks down Valdo, and Safine wants to kill millions of people, and James wants to blow the whole damn place to hell, and Nomi holds Valdo hostage, while Madeline throws tea at Cyclops and traps him, and James goes to Safine to make a trade to leave his plants alone, and he gives James Mathilde, but not Madeline, as he wants to kill her, and James begs him to give him Mathilde and Madeline, and James tries to shoot Safine, but he takes Mathilde with him, and Mathilde bites Safine's hand as she doesn't want to go with Safine. And the cinematography in this whole movie is great, but not as great as Casino Royale and Skyfall, as this may be the third best of the Daniel Craig James Bond movies, in my opinion. Nomi gets Valdo to the plants, and Valdo talks too much as Nomi kicks him gets him dead by the water, which was kind of funny. James and Madeline find Mathilde as she was hiding under a table and reunites while Japanese and Russian planes fly to ask why the MI6 are in the middle of the island. And James, Madeline, and Mathilde bump into Nomi, and James leaves Madeline and Mathilde to finish saving the world from Safin. As he goes to a room to turn off the factory while shooting and fighting some bad guys, including Cyclops, which is the best death in the whole movie. James turns on the power of the factory to turn off the control panel and gets out, and it turns back on. James has to go back and get shot by Safin, and Safin says to James they're both boys with heartbreak, and James shoots Safin dead and goes back, and it turns back off, and he climbs a ladder. He realizes he's not going to make it, where the missiles go to the island to blow it up, and he says one last word to Madeline as he tells her she made a good-looking child, and says his last goodbyes as they blow up the island while James is on there, and he dies with the island, as this was the most sad death in this whole movie, was his death. And the second sad scene was Felix's death, for sure. MQ, Moneypenny, Tanner, and Nomi drink to James, and as that's his funeral in the MI6 building, in M's office, and Madeline and Mathilde drive to Matera, Italy, as Madeline and Mathilde tells Mathilde the story of a man, as his name was Bond, James Bond, and the credits roll with Louis Armstrong singing a dramatic song, and the climax was sad, sure, but this is farewell to Daniel Craig as James Bond, as after the credits, it says James Bond will return despite he died. Maybe he'll come back to life like he did in Skyfall. This is just my theory. He'll come back alive, and then he'll probably get his skin all different looking. I don't know. I'm just going to where I think the next movie will go, and he'll be. And I don't want to quote Tropic Thunder like this, but I think he'll become African, because there's rumors that Idris Elba is going to play him. And in case if anybody doesn't know who Idris Elba is, he's been in things. I've seen him. And maybe some people have, but they just don't remember. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 8.0 out of 10. This movie made me sad twice, not cry, but sad. One was Felix's death, and the other was James's death, as that made me sad the most, as I like Daniel Craig, as he's the best James Bond in the movies, in my opinion, as he was badass. The cinematography was great, but not as great as Casino Royale and Skyfall, as this movie is not as good as those two films, but much better than Quantum of Solace and Spectre. The plot was a complete farewell to Daniel Craig as James Bond, but he'll come back. Not Daniel Craig, but James Bond will come back like he did in Skyfall, but the action was a hell of a lot of fun, and the location shoots were absolutely spectacular. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this incredibly long James Bond retrospective series. I reviewed some before COVID hit. Now I'm to the Daniel Craig stuff now. And until then, the name's Bond. James Bond.